Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see you there. I was just, God, daydreaming in nostalgia. Final Fantasy. It's a series that I sometimes struggle dealing with. Some of my favorite games of all time, and you know, others. It's a series I literally grew up on. One of my earliest memories was playing an emulated copy of Final Fantasy III that had like a fan translation, even though I had no idea what I was doing. Um, but as of late, it's been, I guess disappointing is the right word. Yeah, disappointing. Um, I've just been caught up on this idea of trying to prove that there is something to nostalgia. That sometimes the things we like from the past are because they're good, actually. And vice versa, sometimes the reason why we don't like things is because they didn't work. They didn't work then, and they don't work now. So I'm taking on this project in like the least scientifically way possible. I'm just gonna play every game in the main line of Final Fantasy and see how they fare against the nostalgia factor. I'm gonna start by ranking the games from my current memory of how I feel about them, and then I'm just gonna play them. I'm not really gonna play them in a particular order. I think I'm just gonna grab the games based on a whim, whatever is available and closest to me. I mean, technically, all of them are available to me, but you know what I mean. Some of these I've played once, um, you know, some a long time ago. Pretty much all except 15 I've played to the end credits. And a good chunk of the titles I have played multiple times. and some I've played a lot. Anyway, my plan is to record myself playing each game and put up that entire playthrough on YouTube. When I finish the game, I'll make a review of it. I'll make sure to record a like before I play segment uh, that will put on record sort of a gist of how I feel about the game before we actually start playing. Something that I can reference back to see if my opinions change by the end of it. For a few games, I might do something different than just play the game straight, but I will attempt to play the games as intended by the designers. No speedrun strats, if I happen to know any, which I actually do. But if there's a funny way to play it or an exploit that saves me time, you bet your ass I'm going to do it. Which, of course, is what I'm going to use to justify the no encounter buttons on some of the remastered versions. Okay, probably just one of the games, actually, and you'll see it when I use it. That's part of why I want to record it all and put it up. So y'all can see what I see, and I can be honest with my experience to you and to myself. So, yeah. Ideally, I'm going to start putting up videos as I record them, starting about as soon as next week, maybe a little later, because things are kind of in the air right now. I'll also have to put up a ranking of each game as it sits in my mind. You know what? I can do that right after this, actually. Yeah, let's do that right now. I have the files ready, so I might as well do it. Okay. So, I kind of have a script for this. Uh, but I kind of want it to be like pretty short. So really, the script is just like a loose idea of each game's memory because I've written this all out ahead of time. Um, yeah, I just don't want this to be too long because there's a decent amount of games to go through. Um, and I just don't want to take forever. So, all right. Before I make the list, there are 3 games in the mainline series that aren't included. 11 and 14 are just out. I'm not going to play them. I'm not going to pretend that I'm going to be able to do them any justice. They are so radically different from the rest of the games. I don't really consider them part of the main series, and I think that's fair. Um, you can tell me if it's not fair, but I think it is. And the other one's 15, Final Fantasy 15, because I just didn't beat it. Didn't really play it. I really don't remember anything about 15, like at all. I legitimately don't. So, other than 4 pretty boys in a car, but that's it. So, uh, no point in ranking it because it will just be at the bottom of the list anyway. So, yeah, let's get started with the list, starting with number 12. So the last one on the list, the bottom one on the list, is Final Fantasy 2. Uh, I'm not really sure if I can adequately put into words what I feel will be extraordinarily obvious once you see it in action. But two's just it's just not fun. It's a bunch of fetch quests. It's a system that theoretically is good. It's a story that just kind of exists. Yeah, it's just bad. It's bad, and I hate it, and I'm gonna be mad the whole time I play it, and I just don't know if there's going to be that much fun with that game, and I will say that is the only game on this entire list I don't think I can have fun with in any way, shape, or form, which is unfortunate. But that is also why it is number 12. Number 11. Final Fantasy 13. Boy. This one's probably still pretty fresh in a lot of people's minds, so hopefully I don't have to really go over too much why this one's at the bottom of the list. That being said, I didn't exactly hate it. 2 is the only one I really hate. Everything else around the bottom list is just like, I just don't like it. And like I said, 13's pretty straightforward once you really get into what the problems are. There's a overdumping of exposition. There are characters that are completely unrelatable and uninteresting and just don't shut up. And there's a lot of railroading. Man, and the game doesn't even get good, quote unquote, for like 20 hours plus. It's got an interesting concept, so, and I don't hate everything in it, so, yeah. Well, we'll see how this one ends up. Number 10 is Final Fantasy VIII. So 8 gets a lot of mixed praise and flack, and honestly, I'm still not sure if it entirely deserves it. I know it's got a broken system and like a really weird story that doesn't quite work for everyone. And it might be one of the worst world buildings in any of the Final Fantasies. But it does try to do a lot of good things. It just, I don't think it lands the mark. So, whether or not it works, I think depended on your view of it, and it didn't work for me. And number 9 is 3. Three is an interesting game. Like I said, I had played the fan translation as a kid, and I thought it was neat, but I could never figure it out. And it really wasn't until the DS version came out that I actually got to play it, and I know that it's way different. Um, in terms of its presentation and storytelling, and I'm probably going to judge it based on the DS version and not the NES version. Just because this one's available to me, it's more openly available, and this is the one I'm gonna record. Um, yeah, it's neat. It's not particularly exciting. The characters are kind of fun, but they're not really anything. Um, the job class is good, but not very deep. Not very. It's just. I think that's three in general. It's good, just not very deep. It could be better. Could be a lot worse. And on to number 8 is one Final Fantasy One. And to be honest, one is basically the neutral of all of the games. It doesn't have a lot of terrible offenses. Like, everything that is wrong with it is the same sort of stuff that's wrong with games from the era still, like when you try to play them now. It's like these archaic designs that obviously they didn't know what they were doing because it's the first one. And there's some puzzle solutions that just a little weird and don't quite make sense. But once you do it, it's not a problem. There's no problems in the game. It's just definitely a relic of its time. But I still think it's pretty fun, and I still like the class as well. And like it. This is the water of Final Fantasies. I think it gets a little spicier from here on. So number 7 is 4. So 4 might be the first time that Squaresoft actually got to make the grandiose tale they were trying to tell with 2 and 3. Drama, romance, intrigue, action, comedy. The characters are likable enough, and the story they go through is personal, at least for the main character. I just wish you had a bit more freedom when it came to the party composition, but even that I can't even complain because it's not like the party is bad. The game is balanced around knowing who you're going to have at all times. Yeah, that's pretty much like the worst criticism I have for it right now. I don't remember for in great detail as much as even like some of the others I don't like. But it might have been higher on the list, I think, if I'd played it recently and could recall it a little better. But yeah, no, four is solid. It's good. And number 6 is Final Fantasy X, the first PS2 Final Fantasy, the first to be fully voice acted. And it's one of those games that for me, it's got a ton of high points and a ton of low points, and I think that's makes it a little bit more interesting in my head. And why it's not lower or higher on the list is because both of those things keep kind of pulling it down. I think it has one of the best world buildings in the series, but I think it's also one of the worst worlds in the series just because of the way that they structured the map. Like you just can't go where you want to go in the way you are used to going. It was a jarring change that I didn't care for. I think some people just didn't care. That's fine. It does have one of the best combat systems, but I think it's got one of the worst leveling systems. Not the worst leveling system. That's not like the right way to put it, but um, I I'm not a big fan of the sphere grid. I don't think it's that interesting. Uh, I'll get into it more, I think, when we start playing it, but it just feels uh, like they're trying to give you choice, but it doesn't actually give you a choice. And I think when I do play that one I'm going to try and figure out something fun with the sphere grid, because that's the part that I'm the least interested in. Yeah. I like the characters and the setting, but the voice acting at times can be kind of jarring. I know there's that famous laughing scene and it's supposed to be awkward, but it doesn't make it good. Um, or fun to sit through. Um, Stories, I don't think the story is very good. I don't think it's very bad either, but it kind of at times I'm taken out of the drama that they're trying to put out there. Um, yeah, I just I can't deny that it's better than pretty much every game above it. So I think that is as much true. I think at this point I have to justify it being lower than the rest of the list. Um, that being said, on to number 5, which is 12. So if 10 has really high peaks and really high or really low valleys, 12 does not. Um, and I think that helps it for me in some way. It's just a consistent experience every time. Uh, I like the characters a lot better, and I like the world a lot better, and I like the story, even if the story isn't that compelling. It's not some huge thing. It's just a story. Then they tell it, and it's okay. The Gamut system, their the license board system, it's okay. I kind of have the same problem with it as I do with the sphere grid. It has the illusion of choice, but it's really not that big of a choice. You're gonna get mostly everything you're gonna want, um, in the order that it kind of makes sense to get it. Um, the Gamut system, I know a lot of people really didn't like it. I love the Gamut system. I thought it was really neat, and I don't know, I liked it. But I do get the criticism that the game can be kind of boring. Um, yeah, it's just like sometimes a little boring, not always very exciting, and I think that's its worst problem is it doesn't have one big swing in either direction. But I might be looking forward to playing 12 the most out of all of them to see if there is something to 12 that I'm missing, or maybe I'm wrong about it being even as high as it is. But we'll see. And next on the list is number 4, Final Fantasy V. Oh, so this one I always feel gets thrown under the bus. Um, it feels like it's a big stinker when I tell people, "Oh yeah, Final Fantasy V is great." Um, it's so overlooked, but I think a lot of that has to do with the release, like the way it came out. Like it didn't come out in America, obviously, until what, the late '90s, and by then nobody cared about. No one wants to play the Super Nintendo version. They want to play the PS2 version, because I think PS2 was coming out like the next year or something. I don't remember the timing. what I do remember is nobody cared about the game then, and nobody cares about the game now. But it might be my most played Final Fantasy, and I'll explain. Well, I can explain now, but mostly because of the Four Job Fiesta charity run thing. Um, yeah, that might have endeared me to the game a little bit, but I legitimately think that five has a lot to offer compared to a lot of the contemporaries, and even compared to the ones surrounding it, Final Fantasy IV and Final Fantasy VI. I find that it has a simpler story, which isn't a bad thing. I think a more focused story that just is about an adventure. Um, it takes itself seriously, but it's a lot more lighthearted and a lot more fun and a lot more, I guess, high stakes, low stakes going on. It's I don't know. I think that people just kind of look at it a little weird because it's kind of like the goofy cousin of all the other Final Fantasies. And five might have my favorite like leveling system, whatever mechanic in all of them. At least the one that feels the most fun to use. Outside of maybe Final Fantasy Tactics or 10-2 of all games. And even then, those two employ the exact same job class kind of system. Um, but five's just fun. Five's a lot of fun. I think proving why five is this high and 10 is just below it might be like the crux of this whole experiment. So, all right, now we're into the final stretch. Top three, I think, are a lot of people's top three. Like, I don't think there's anything unique about the three that I've picked. Like, oh yeah, well these are the best three. I mean, these are, I think, the general consensus, right? I think it's just what everyone cares about is which order are these three in. Anyways, so number three for me is Final Fantasy VI. I think six is great. It's got a great world. It's got a great story. It's got great characters. I want to say a great combat system, but it's an okay combat system. Um, Easily some of the best music in the game or in the series. Where I have faults, they sound kind of like nitpicks. I'll admit that they kind of are, but it's enough to take me out of the game and bring it down just a little bit compared to the other two. Because I think the other two, we'll talk about those. But yeah, the combat system, it just, it's cool that you have all of these characters with unique abilities. I mean, 4 did that, right? Like, you have XYZ character that does XYZ thing. But with the exception of like a few, by the end of the game, it doesn't matter. You're not using their abilities anymore. At least you don't need to. For most people, I know that some of them do well throughout the whole game, but not all of them. At some point, you just stop sealing with Locke. Like, that's just the truth. Um, but and the fact that you don't get the magic for such a long time, like in story, I know it's kind of quick if you know what you're doing, but for most people's playthrough, I mean that's 15 hours in before you can cast magic with anyone other than Terra. Um, yeah, it also kind of has a fault with the narrative towards the end of the game, just because of the nature of the way that they set things up. I don't really want to spoil anything in the game, even though it's a 20 plus year old game. Uh, But I will say that because there's so many characters and the limitations of the Super Nintendo and how like short a time frame they had to actually make the game, I can excuse the fact that they don't have great dialogue options that feel unique to each character, but at the same time, it's still an issue. Um, is it a don't play this game issue? No. Uh, is it a keep it from being the best of the best issue? For me, yes. And it feels terrible because I'm not going to be nearly as harsh on the other two as I was on this one. So I really want to reiterate that I think 6 is legit great. I do think 6 is better than everything else on the list. Absolutely. Uh, so now that that's out of the way, let's get on to number 2. Screw that up. Final Fantasy 7. 7 is pretty good. Well, 3 is the first one I played, and I think 4 was the first one I beat. 7 was the first one I emotionally connected with. And the second one I beat, I guess. But it's good on a lot of different levels. The exception being the character models. They're not good. I'll admit that. I like them. I mean, I don't mind them, but I'm used to them. And again, I think that's what this whole nostalgia factor thing experiment is going to be about. Is does stuff like the character models get in the way? In 2021, like we'll see. But it's probably got my favorite story outside of the one above it. I really don't think it's a coincidence. Square's tried so many times to recreate the emotional resonance that happened in this game, both in the game and outside of the game. It's just it's great. I do have nitpicks regarding a lot of some stuff. It's not as harsh as 6's. I mean, the materia system is like almost interesting, but conversely, whereas 6 had characters that were different, so it did matter kind of what materia you put on people or what magic you put on people. In 7, there doesn't feel like that much variety. It feels like there's a bunch of people who can punch and a bunch of people who can do magic. And I know stat wise, some of them are better at it than others, but it doesn't actually give that feel very well, at least not through the numbers. It feels like you just equip materia on whoever you feel like. The materia does all the work, does all the heavy lifting for the characters, raw damage. So, yeah, it's just a system. it's not a bad one. And yet some of the side games, the snowboarding and the motorcycle game, they're just not good. You know, overall, 7 is. I mean, 7. They did a goddamn remake of it, for Christ's sakes. Which I realize now that the list is over and you can't see. Whatever. Anyways. Now we're finally on to number 1. Which, if you can do the math, you can tell is number 9. And 9 is. Mwah. It's an homage to all the earlier titles, but it's still its own thing. I think it's one of the ones that manages to have this big globetrotting adventure that still feels like. Well, I don't want to say it feels fun, but it feels more of an adventure than some of the others. I mean, 8 so tries to be so gritty. 7 is gritty. 6 is greasy and kind of cynical towards the end. But 9 is just, it's a fantasy game. It's like 4, like 5 before it. They're just telling an actual fantasy adventure, complete with swashbuckling pirates or thieves. The difference is negligible, I think. Yeah, I mean, I just think it's a really well told story with almost every character being really important and really useful to the story at hand. Um, there's a couple of characters that you could get away with not having and it'd probably be the same game, but I don't care that they're in the game. They don't ruin it, they don't take it out. And they kind of add a little bit of humor. It's not, doesn't really always work. I think the only like real issue with 9 is the ass pull of a boss at the end. But that feels a lot like the rule and not the exception in a decent amount of these, where it's just like, oh yeah, and yeah, it's God. He's here now. So yeah, all right. So this is the list. Hold on, camera positions is hard. This is the list as it stands right now. So after I beat the first game that I'm going to play, I'll make a new list and update it accordingly. And the first game I play is going to be 8. Again, there's no rhyme or reason for my selections. I figure the order doesn't matter as long as I play them all. And the only exception to this is I'm going to play 15 last. It's just the one I want to play last, but also because I know it's so different from all the rest, and because I haven't played it, I want that one to be the most fresh on the list, just to make sure that it's I don't know, good, or that my opinion is good and that it stands true. So yeah, I'm just gonna play them as I get them. I'm gonna start with 8. I do have. Ooh. Mouse fell. I do have the PlayStation 1 copy of it, but I'm probably gonna play it on the Switch because there's a no encounter button and I don't care. And that one I do have a unique playthrough in mind, and that's why I want to do that one first. Because I think that I just want to get out of the way. Anyways, so thanks for watching. Like and subscribe if you want to get updates about the series. I should be posting the first recording and the before I play pregame thoughts sometime within the next week. So, yeah. Oh, and leave a comment with your own list of Final Fantasy games, and you can yell at me for my opinions. Anyway, bye.